Stephen Leto, they are tracing back the history of Raila Odinga, the detention time in prison, some of the people who represented him in courts at the time, and also the second liberation, his input in the repeal of Section 2A of the Constitution, the multi-party democracy and the environment that set in thereafter, the 1997 elections, what happened in 2002, and also the ugly spectre of 2007-8 post-election skirmishes which engulfed the country, and the peace talks that were midwifed by, amongst others, Kofi Annan, the then UN Secretary General, now deceased, and former Tanzanian President Benjamin Mkapa, also deceased, who had also written a book about the negotiations at the Serena hotels, where he talked about the extent to which they had to kick out then Martha Karua and William Ruto, Eldoret North Member of Parliament, then Anne Gishugu for Martha Karua, for the streamlining of the talks which led to the birth of the Grand Coalition government, the new constitution, and then thereafter the presidential contest in 2013 and also in 2017. Some of the people he talked to included Senior Counsel James Orengo, who was Raila's close confidant throughout his political career up to now. And back in studio, gentlemen, just a reflection of that as well, because we had prepared that piece by Leto to just give a bit of an understanding as to who the man Raila Odinga is. Of course, there are many chapters that can be written about him. Gordon, what's your reaction to that? I mean, if this was then beamed for the African audiences as a whole, they would be getting somewhat a political animal who can maneuver or navigate the very delicate waters of the world, is it, given the contemporary times? Well,
Raila's story always depends on who is telling it and from which part of the world is standing. Everybody or anyone can tell Raila's story differently, but one thing you can't take away from him is a man who has the wherewithal to maneuver. In fact, Raila is always at his best when everyone sees him to be at his worst. When things seems to be so thick and dark for him, that is when he's at his. He operates when things are not so good looking. I think because this will be on YouTube and in the internet,
yes,
the world will look at some of these things. Young people who might have not known Raila Odinga will look at this, and they will see a man who has surmounted every kind of challenge to be where he is today, and a man who is capable of having political, diplomatic maneuvers within the region and across the African continent to get what is best for the people. Because even from what we've seen, it's like Raila Odinga has always been a pro-people's person. When it's not working for the people, actually, he won't be for it. If you read interventions by Kofi Annan, Life in War and Peace, yeah, Kofi Annan brings out a Raila Odinga who could look for him at night and tell him, because if they are having a hard stand, what is the break point? Because people around him seemingly had very hard positions, but they could meet Annan overnight, and Annan could meet Kibaki overnight. They have a conversation and then decide on what to do. Even at the point of signing that deal, Annan clearly puts in his book that he had to summon, he had to call White House and tell Condoleezza Rice, the then Secretary of State, Condoleezza, I want you to help me. Please issue this statement so that people who are not aligning to what we are doing here in Kenya can be sanctioned. At that point, there was a deal breaker. Okay. So Raila all along has been a pro-people's person, and we hope that pro-people ideology will permeate into the entire continent, into the work that is about to begin.
Ahmed, of course, you were at the heart of some of these footages that we had compiled from our archives. And at the height of 2007, what can you tell us from the man who you had so much in love with at the time and subscribed to his policies and ideologies?
It is not love that drives politics. It is a commitment to a certain political economy, a vision about your country. And there are equals, and then there's the first among equals. I think Raila Odinga is the most brilliant politician that Kenya has ever produced. I think he's in the same league as Jomo Kenyatta. He's in the same league as Jaramogi Odinga. I think he's in the same league as those fellows because, and it's true that you can't take that away from him. His personal sacrifice on those issues are well documented. I mean, that's something that I cannot contest. I was a very close aide to the man. And I was a witness to, from the beginning to the end of that process. I'm the one who opened the door for that Kofi Annan. I'm the one who brought Condoleezza Rice to Serena Hotel. I remember sitting with my cousin, who was the UN representative here, the director of communications, Nasir Ege Muse, and myself and Dr. Mohammed Isahakia. We were 3 people from the same clan who came from different directions to meet with the Kofi Annan and Mr. Odinga. And I still remember a very poignant day that day at Serena Hotel. The 3 of us looked at each other and we said, "Cousin, how are you? Cousin, how are you?" We, you know, everybody, Musaki had come in as the permanent secretary. I was the spokesman, and he was working for the UN, and we sat there, and the 3 of us looked at each other and said, you know, what are we going to do? We're going to commit to peace. And Mr. Odinga was there, and Mr. Kofi Annan was there. It's going to be in a book, but I cannot find any politician in this country who has the shoulders and the commitment and the vision and the alacrity and the adroitness. There's no words I can use to describe Mr. Odinga. The freedoms that we have today essentially was driven by Mr. Odinga. There are many people who stand with him. But as far as I'm concerned, because we're in the same political party as Social Democratic Party, which now has become a party without any ideology. It's a big orange thing, but we don't know what it stands for anymore. So my division, or with my senior, my teacher, my elder, the statesman that he is a point of conscience, a point of political agreement or disagreement. And that's very natural. We can agree with you or we cannot disagree with you. But that his record, you know, no one can take his record. You will not be a man if you're not able to accept another man's, you know, clear record. Secondly, I think that the vision of a Kenya, of a constitutional state with the rule of law and an economy that is prosperous. You know, remember, we can't eat the constitution. You know, when you go to lunch, you can't say, give me the constitution for lunch. People have to eat, have to live in homes. And the idea of a constitution is to drive an economy, to drive a society towards the common good. Okay. And I think that it's very unfortunate that this country did not elect that man in a landslide in the last election. I think it's a devastating commentary about the character of this country and its tribal roots. I think that Mr. Odinga tried to overcome those things. As a human being, he has a lot of failures, and it's not my place today to speak about those failures. Those will come in a book. But right now, the country's conscience have realized that they made a mistake. They made a mistake, and that you should have given the man from CI a chance. I gave him nearly 15 years of my life to support it, and the commitment was because we wanted, as a patriot, for this country to change, and it did change. Today we have a constitutional system of government. We have the counties. We have a free press. Mr. Ayub, there is a time in which if you said something, the CID would come through that door. Right through that door and arrest you on air. And that is no longer the case for men and women who stood up in a time of darkness. And Mr. Odinga is the one who led that team. And I'm happy to say these positive things about it, even though I feel that in the AU, that these countries and these people in the AU are going to cause this man a lot of trouble. That's my view. And this is a democracy. And if you cannot speak your mind, if you cannot speak your mind in your own country, then you don't have a constitution, neither do you have a democratic system of government.
Yes, Prof.
Yes. First of all, we have to acknowledge how far Raila has come up to this point when he's going for the continental kind of politics. I must say that Raila has really overcome the vagaries of Kenyan politics.
Yeah.
Of course, in one way, in certain contexts, certain circumstances, with cruelty, political cruelty and brutality, perhaps, of the previous regimes. That one, particularly that one of Moi. Until now, when he now throws his full weight in the continental politics. Ahmed used a very good word, patriotism. And I think the patriotism is visible, at least highly visible, in Raila's early years of struggle, liberation struggle in this country from 1992. And other than that patriotism, I think Raila Odinga, in all that we have watched, brings the image of a selfless, person who has engaged a great deal of his life, including personal life, his destiny, in the emancipatory struggle for egalitarianism in this country, the struggle for equity, equality, despite, of course, our complex ethnic arrangements that perhaps can puncture the vision or however vibrant. In fact, Raila Odinga is one person who has overcome, the negativities of our ethnic politics. And that's why you can see he was able to galvanize, a great deal of African leaders. Raila Odinga is one person who went to the doorstep of a majority of African leaders compared perhaps to his opponents. And I think deep down his heart, he does understand that whatever the outcome of today, he still has a role in championing and stewarding Kenya into destiny. All of us really want a better future for our country, better constitutional and political governance. Wherever he is, Raila does deeply understand, he has actually internalized that vision that Kenya will be far much a better country, even as he leads and stewards us in the African continental sphere. Perhaps other character nature of Africa is that, of Raila is that, really, Raila has got both versatile and volatile political persona. And I think that's why, some people gravitate towards him. Others also, it's a point of, it's a turn of point because of his political nature. And I also think Raila is also one person who's very quick to take his opponent's magnanimity.
Yes. And
we saw this the first time he folded NDP and worked with Moi, and after that, of course, there was a very short bromance with Kibaki. Again, worked with Kibaki in the Nusum Kate government. And despite what happened in Uhuru's first term and part of second term, there was a handshake. So this is somebody who is always very quick in the interest of the country to accept the magnanimity of the opponent, for the better and for the betterment of our country. That's all I can say about Raila. His forgiving nature, and we wish him well this time round. Okay.
So, gentlemen, let's take a look at what had transpired since morning at the headquarters of the African Union to just get a brief synopsis of what we had since morning, where the session had gone underway in the morning of the heads of states plenary at the African Union headquarters, and the pictures rolling on your screens of President William Ruto in the morning when he led the Kenyan delegation to take their designated positions where they had been sitting before the break, and the closed door session thereafter is now underway and will be getting the statements out first, as that will be communicated from our Addis Ababa team, the trio of Stephen Leto, Olive Barrows and Seth Olale, who will be giving us the assessment from there. So in the morning we had the statements issued by Musa Faki Mahamat, the outgoing African Union Commission chairperson, who outlined very significant key talking points, including Palestine, Gaza, and the crisis there, saying that the African Union is keeping an eye there and has expressed concerns as the unit, the body, the polity of it, saying that statements such as that of what came out of the White House since Trump took over power 2.0 was not not welcome, and the unison nature in which Africa had responded to that. The question of financial resources, which he said is critical to fund education, healthcare, and other critical sectors in the continent. Talked about Africa's gold mine, Africa's youth, who he said will turbocharge the continent's next move to stratospheric heights, and the reflections of his past 8 years of his term since he was first elected to the office in 2017. We also heard from Antonio Guterres, and we'll be continuing with this pertinent point of the global world order, the need for African voices, permanently so at the UN Security Council, where he said at least 2 would be enough to cater for the needs of the 1.5 billion Africans across the continent. And he said the degree of bewilderment that the world is watching with as the global world order appears to be crumbling under the adherence to the rule of law and international order becoming more fragile by the day. Also, the statement by Joao Lorenzo, the African Union chairperson, who talked about the three key pointers of silencing the guns, peace and stability, and financial resources after his maiden debut speech at Addis Ababa's AU headquarters, taking over from Mohamed Al-Oud Sheikh Al-Ghazwani, the president of the Islamic Republic of Mauritania, and of course also the chairperson of the Caribbean Community, Barbados Prime Minister Maya Motley, who also outlined key issues she said people of African descent should be focusing on at the moment, and the support system that her country provided in the ending of apartheid in South Africa in 1991, confronting the challenges of the new world, the end of middlemen or neocolonialism, visas as a form of restrictive movement of people across the world, and stability of the world, which she said cannot be achieved without Africa's stability. We'll be talking about whether Africa will be the new voice. So first, let's get the sound bites from the people, sampled, of course, feedback from members of the public. First, to just get direction from my director. Yes, these are the sound bites from Kondele Roundabout, where Kenyans from Kisumu County had gathered, and my colleague Laura Otieno has been on that bit, and this is what they told her.
Well, indeed, Ayub, there's an aura of anxiety and a lot of euphoria here in Kondele as supporters of Raila Odinga, stormed this place basically following the proceedings from a screen. There has been a watch party from around 10 a.m. and, the crowd is swelling with every passing minute. So perhaps we go directly to the people to tell us, anza na jina na utuambie unatarajia nini? Manake saizi wanaenda kwa closed door, wafanye kura kisha matokeo utoke. Wewe unatarajia nini?
My name is Frederick Otieno. We are really optimistic. We want Raila to win. That is why we are here. We are here to support Raila Odinga and to support his candidature as the AUC chairman. That is why we are here today, and we are optimistic. All we want today is to celebrate after the results. That is exactly what we want.
Sawa, speak to our next person. Simama hapa, anza na jina, unaambia unatarajia nini na umejipanga namna gani baada ya matokeo kutolewa?
Kwa majina anaitwa Odinga the Beast. Kenyewa anatarajia siku ya leo natarajia baba kwa mshindi sisi kama wa Kenya, sababu tushamwombea baba kama mpiganizi wa Kenya na Afrika nzima. So kwa hivyo salamu njema kwake baba, wapige kura ashinde, basi tunangojea kucelebrate sisi kama wa Kenya. Hiyo ndio Kenya tumetweka hapa Kisumu leo siku ya leo.
Sawa, asante sana. Niambie unaitwa nani, unatarajia nini matokeo ya AU?
Mimi naitwa Omondi Anunga. Tuko hapa Kisumu. Tunatarajia ili tupate matokeo mzuri. Tumeomba na tunajua hii Raila shachukua, tunangoja tu matokeo. Sisi tuko na imani kama sisi wa Kondele Kisumu, tuko na imani Raila Amolo Odinga Tinga Ruadwa baba wa Bunyalego ameshachukua.
Haya, shukrani sana. Pengine manake ya muda nichukue nani? Haya, wawili wa mwisho nitachukua huyu kisha huyu.
Mimi sawa. Raila power! Raila power! Baba power! Isama power! Round hii, round hii. Baba lazima tangazwe. Baba lazima tangazwe. AU tunaenda. Leo lazima baba tangazwe. Kama hajatangazwa, maandamano.
Haya, shukrani sana. Kwa kifupi tuanze na jina. Songa kando kidogo, songa kando. Anza na jina, unaambia unatarajia nini?
Kwa
majina naitwa Anthony. Mimi ni mfuasi wa baba, yani Kondele Barracks. Kondele Barracks, oye! Oye! Tunasema Raila ndio lion wa Afrika, si ndio? Kwa sababu yeye ni mtu wa demokrasi. Sasa tulikuwa tunaomba hivi, President wa Kenya amesupport Raila sana na tumefurahia. Bwana Ruto, tunaomba Raila kishakuwa tu AUC chairman tarehe 15 kila mwaka weka Raila Day, ikuwe holiday ya Raila.
To more residents basically to understand what their feelings are, but they're saying they're generally very optimistic that Raila will emerge victorious. So this is what the atmosphere is like here in Kondele. Celebration, where they say it's early celebrations. So of course we will be on standby to capture the reaction of the residents once the results will be out.
Laura Otieno there from our Watch Party Center in Kondele, the county of Kisumu, and the feedback from members of the public, the excitement there, and which had filled the environment as to their expectations of a positive outcome from the elections that will be happening in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, the headquarters of the African Union. And Hashi, on you, since morning march we talked about, it seems that we had largely revolved around pertinent matters in global world today. Many were concerned when Trump 2.0 came back to the White House, and what many Republicans had termed as dangerous, nativist, extreme, and racial politics that he had advanced with his, of course, catalogue of leadership. Yesterday, J.D. Vance was in Europe, talked about the same. You have seen Elon Musk saying now, make Europe great again. It's mega from MAGA in America. How can Africa be the voice of reason in a world where fluidity is coming in? If you look at the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, also had advanced such a cause of Hindutva in India with the BJP party, such a big democracy. If you talk about more than 900 million voters, how then does this continent become the voice of reason to drive global cause, adherence to the rule of law and international order?
Precisely, I think you've answered your own question, because Africa in itself has become very nativist itself. This is why they keep talking of Trump as being tribal, as Africans are. And I think that's an unfair criticism of us, because I don't like to say that we're at a level of development, because once you start comparing African development and Western civilization, African civilization and Western civilization, you're making an inherently erroneous mistake. Because, of course, this Western civilization is about 300 years old. It's as old as the American Republic. And Europe, of course, was under monarchies for about a few hundred years. And before that, we had an Islamic civilization for 1,000 years. And then you had the civilization of Kemet in Egypt. So the great Edward Said is the one who's taught us about the idea of clash of civilizations. And you know, it is this American and European, particularly American and European peoples, who believe that there's a clash of civilizations that's going on. This is why you have something called Fortress Europe. This is why you have a Fortress America. This is, you know, we have our prosperity, and we want to guard this prosperity against people, particularly people of color. But the prosperity is funded, driven by resources from the people of color, from the global majority, the global south. And I think it is important for us to end our nativist claims to politics, where, you know, you have a group of people who decide that their consciousness is connected to a certain historical sociology. And I think that we are to oppose that. For an example, here in Kenya, we don't have a nation. We have a country, but we don't have a nation. Well, a clear example is the Somali community, the community that I come from, where the independent, the ID card is causing bedlam across the other ethnic communities in the country. You could hear what the governor of Trans Nzoia, Mr. Natembeya, spoke about, that the security of the country was going to be compromised. Half his population of the Bukusu people are across in Uganda. Every other tribe in this country is well represented in other countries. The Luos who are sitting next to me are in 4 countries. 4. We're just across the border. No, there's no, to me, it's the same place. Now, so the point I'm trying to make is that we have to, Tanzania has done a superb job under Julius Nyerere. They've overcome this thing.
Was it the concept of socialism then for them?
It is not the concept of socialism. It was the concept of Africanism. You know, I think socialism is a European experiment. It is not an African experiment. We have foundations of socio-political institutions that are socialist by nature. It is not the Europeans who invented socialism. Socialism has been out in the communities of Africans for a long time. You know that about our community, where our resources are not just ours, where we spread the resources to the ones who are not well off. And I think that what we need to do is, first of all, grow our economies. In the reality of this world, our manufacturing, our resources, our making sure that our products are, sent with a value added on top of it, that we build the East Africa that we want, that we settle the Somali Republic forever. It's pathetic for the Ethiopians and the Kenyans and all these other people to have peacekeeping in Somalia. We should have a state in Somalia. It's been 30 years. Why is it like that? Simply because it has trillions and trillions of dollars under its land and its resources. And it's in trouble by Western companies and Western institutions, where the DRC is in the same problem, where Western states are directly involved, including China, in turning to this country to a basket case. So what we need to do is not grow up. What we need to do is not to open our eyes. What we need to do is to stand up and say we are going to end business as it used to be. And I think that the most important thing is to take over political power. And one of the representatives of the social democratic movement, of the Africanist perspective, is Mr. Raila Odinga. Problem is he's now in bed with the ultra-wing conservatives in this country, like our president, Mr. Ruto, who has never signed for any one progressive thing in this country's history. Just a fact. Should be able to speak. We fought for a constitution. It's our right to speak about what's going on in this country because it affects our children, it affects our homes, it affects our communities that we come from. So it's important through peaceful democratic means for us to change the governors if the governors are not doing the right thing by the people of their country, their region and the continent, Africa.
And Gordon, what do you make of the 3-point outlined by President João Lourenço, the Republic of Angola, now the new African Union chairperson? In hindsight, the conflict in the DRC and the instability in western part of the continent and the Horn?
Well, Africa generally is a laboratory of civil war, a laboratory of armed conflict, a laboratory of terrorism. Every other bad thing is tested within Africa, and most of the Great Lakes region and the Sahel region today. The conflict within the DRC and the eastern DRC now spreading towards Bukavu, you will realize that there's too much noise around this. But when this noise dies down, I can assure you that a country like Kenya is playing a very significant role that may not be realized today. Like many other East African countries, they're playing that significant role. One thing that the region and African continent must do is to ensure that they have enough resources to ensure that they don't just quell the wars when they begin, but prevent them. We must work towards prevention rather than peacekeeping. In working towards prevention, many leaders who spoke, including the Angolan president, did mention that the architecture of United Nations Security Council does not serve Africa as it is, because we are there just for a year or so as individual countries that at times may also want to serve their personal interests. But look at the population of Africa. Look at the land of Africa. Population alone of Africa doubles nearly the population of America and Europe combined. But how many members of the permanent are in the permanent 5 are within Europe alone? So it is time that we have a UN resolution from the United Nations Security Council that will ensure that money that ought to be coming for this peacekeeping and everything is channeled way before to the African continent to ensure that it can work on its security architecture, to ensure that it can quell tensions, it can avert some of these wars before they erupt. Because why must we wait for UN to bring the blue helmet, whereas we have soldiers within African continent that only need facilitation to ensure they carry out some of these duties. So we must relook at the security architecture of the AU, but tie it along with the UN Security Council so that the resources that member states within AU channel to UN comes back to us for way ahead preparation for some of these things.
And peace and stability, Prof, also one of the other aspects outlined by President Joao, who takes over from President Al-Ghazouani of the Islamic Republic of Mauritania. What do you make of this? How will the Security Council of the continent be, with keen observation, find remedial measures to the instability cases in the continent?
Africa's peace and security instabilities has got a historical underpinning that is deeply rooted, by the way, in the history of colonialism, the history of slavery and slave trade, the history of Western exploitation and even subjugation. That is to say that whatever kind of a peace and security architecture of a continental level that we want to craft and fashion has got to take account the historical injustices that are deeply rooted in our past. And our past goes beyond 400 years ago. You know, by the way, that as a matter of fact, whatever happens in the Congo, whatever is happening in the Sudan, in southern Sudan, and other parts of the world may not be remedied by a hastily crafted or fashioned mechanism or a knee-jerk response, such as interventions of a regional force or intervention of a global force. We really have to go into the deep-rooted schisms. How did we end up here? What are some of the multivariated phenomena that we really need to address? I laud the chair's statement because we need to have African solutions to African problems. Locally founded solution to local problems. That's the concept of endogeneity. Now, going forward, in my view, I think African peace and security architecture has to be a participatory approach. We have to create an African law, norms, and institutions from below. One that is conscious, one that understands the local and localized problems of the people. Otherwise, with global intervention, with continental intervention, that is completely detached from the local problems, will not bring a long-lasting solution. More fundamentally, it just come to my mind. The solution to Africa's instability and insecurity lies largely in the global politics. How is it that our countries are getting far much developed on our resources?
All right.
You can see the measures that South Africa has already taken in response to Trump's sanctions. Because this is Africa, which is the richest, which has got all the minerals that the world depends on for their own economic progression, development, and all this. Yet we are the most impoverished. And even in these security hotspots or insecurity hotspots, if you look very deeply, the problem, the fomentation or the fermentation of security in those areas, the roots are elsewhere, outside the continent of Africa. Because people need our resources, they need our minerals. In fact, there's a new security problem in Mozambique, particularly in rich mineral areas. How is it that it is only in Africa with vast resources, areas in Africa with vast resources, where there's insecurity? Who is actually fomenting this insecurity and instabilities? we need to look deeply into such.
Ahmed, a quick observation here. How does this play out then? Because President Joao Lorenzo, the Republic of Angola, has just been elected the chairperson of the African Union. He comes from Angola, which is a member of SADC, the Southern African Development Community. Also, SADC is fronting the president of African Development Bank, a Zambian national. How does this play out, given the statement we have seen from SADC member states to rally behind Richard Randriamandrato?
We shouldn't be surprised because we rallied, the East African community rallied for Raila Odinga. The contest is between the East Africa and Djibouti, Kenya, Djibouti. Now, I think that South Africa is hedging its, the southern region is hedging its bet. They want to vote as a bloc. To vote as a bloc to the candidate who is going to give in return to their group. Right now, Angola is the chairman, so Angola as a country is going to remain neutral, as all chairmen do during a vote. Unless there's a block, they go through 5 or 6 rounds, and there's a tie, and the chairman has to break the tie. Then maybe the Angolan delegation will vote for or against. But my view is that it is going to be won on the floor of that African Union. That is why everybody's there. And it depends on the Kenyan delegation's political acumen, particularly President Ruto's talk to the presidents. I think Raila Odinga is an international figure, is an African figure, is a Kenyan figure. I think his campaign also will, by his person, will contribute a lot. But you see, there are many other hands. You see, the American ambassador to Ethiopia, or the American delegation was there. The European delegation was there. The French are going to get involved.
The Arab Emirates.
The Arab Emirates are going to be involved. And there is also talk about money coming into the African Union from places that want to influence that election. So it is a very complicated election for 55 countries to make an election to create that chairman.
Though 5 will not be voting.
5 will not be voting. And that 5, I think, will be deducted from the candidate from Djibouti, I believe so. Because 3 of them are in the Sahel, they would have precisely voted against Mr. Odinga, because they're very militant about it. And I think it's important for us to understand one very careful thing. And I think this, I've repeated this over and over and over again. There'll be international hands in our election, in the African Union. And until we stand up and say, you're not going to influence our elections just as much as we don't influence the EU elections, then we will be able to have a proper election and proper situation about our African Union, and in the coming generations that union should become what it should be, a union of African states represented by one government, which has been the dream of billions of Africans for ages.
Is it at the moment living its purpose?
You know, the late Muammar Gaddafi at this, the CERTE declaration, whatever you want to pronounce it, was the one that helped fund the AU. And they toppled his government. The French Republic toppled that fellow under the President Sarkozy. Precisely because of his input towards Africa. And Gaddafi's influence has led to these coups in the Sahel, because many of the people who are there followed his ideology of trying to create this Afrocentrism, the ideology of Afrocentrism, so that people can have independence, some form of true independence. I think that we will still have agents of foreign powers there, working for them and working against the African Union. And it is our responsibility to stand up and say, like Martin Luther King said a long time ago, that we have come to the top of the mountain, that he could see across the valleys, and he could see that there will be a day in which Africa will be liberated from these problems that we have.
Yeah, Gordon, you had a point.
Just on what Prof had mentioned earlier, I think in all that is said, African problem can be summarized in two ways. One is the post-colonial mentality. We still have that mentality of we were colonized, they did to us this, it's time. If you read Professor Chile Mbembe's book of post-colony, if the day we walk out of that shell of we were colonized, we will play a different ball game. And another way we can summarize it is through Professor Ali Mazroui's writing, The Triple Heritage. Ayub, today you eat French fries, right?
Yes.
French fries, and I mean French fries.
No chips.
and then after
English breakfast.
After eating French fries, you pray the Islamic prayer.
Chips.
After all that, how do you dress?
English tea.
European.
Triple heritage. Where's Africa in all that, the three things we've counted?
Probably none.
So, back to your question of which my brother here did elaborate on. As it is now, one fundamental thing for Africa is to not look at the past. It is important to know what the past entailed, but it is important, much more important, to have a vision for the next 100 years or so. Our problem is we budget for 1 year. Other people budget with 20, 30, 40, 60, 100 years to come. So the moment we can come out of that shell and ensure that our vision is a vision that is a cocktail of vision. We can't just have a vision that is only political. Within that, the political aspect of it, can we have an economic blueprint that wants to take Africa somewhere for the next 50 or 100 years? And following that, I'm telling you, Africa would be what it wants to be because of the visionary leadership that it has within it, that it has never given space to thrive.
Okay, and Prof, also some of the other issues that were outlined included what Antonio Guterres said from the Lactan in Addis, the need for African voices permanently within the United Nations Security Council in light of what has been happening. How key will this be if these two critical seats will be granted at the United Nations Security Council?
Yes, something about voice is that voice gives you ownership, it gives you participation, it makes you an owner of process. Now, the question of ownership of process, including outcomes, the question of ownership of discourse has particularly been missing, when you go to the UN platforms. African voices are always muzzled. And in circumstances where they are not muzzled, they are very shrill. We speak with shrill voice, even in terms of our international diplomacy. Very few people have taken the war to the UN in New York. I think it was only Robert Mugabe at some point that took the African war to the UN platform or the United Nations human rights and other systems. Now, for us to have a strong, bold voice, at least beginning today, we have to have a newfound diplomacy. And actually, I want to encourage whoever takes the position of the AUC chair today. The need for us to have a voice at the UN systems, all UN normative system and institutional systems, we must radicalize institutions. The African Union institutions, whether the African Development Bank, the Court, the African Commission, including other regional blocs, we must radicalize institutions. But more fundamentally, we must also institutionalize radicalism in the kind of politics that we will export there into the globe. Look at it. When the Americans, the United States of America, is talking one language of excessive language of American economic nationalism, closing borders, including tariffs, even to their own brother, China. Canada is Mexico. Just there. Their most immediate neighbor. They're telling them, if you cannot become the 51st state, forget about it. Why must we continue to have soft diplomacy, a diplomacy of docile bodies? When Europeans are talking about the entire EU, is talking about the whole issue of migration. And in fact, the whole idea about Brexit was a rejection of the global cosmopolitanism. In fact, the language today, it is so, it is so violent against the others, and the others include some of us in Africa. We must radicalize our diplomacy. We must institutionalize radicalism, both in the language of the diplomats that we will practice there. If Americans are doing it, the Europeans are doing it, why would Africans not?
Why not then become the voice of reason in a world of chaos? I mean, if you have Donald Trump and the circus at the White House, Trump 2.0, I'll come to you, Ahmed, and you have seen what's happening in Europe largely. You talked about Brexit and how it was driven even on propaganda basis. And you're seeing the AfD in Germany, and we have seen what's happening in Hungary with Viktor Orban, and also Marine Le Pen in France and Matteo Salvini in Italy. How then Africa becomes the voice of reason in this chaotic world?
The voice of reason will not overcome particularly the trammels of global politics in which we are today. The politics in which we are today is the politics of both economic and political power domination and hegemony. Okay? If it has not worked for Americans, that's why all of a sudden it has completely shifted into a global politics of radicalism.
Yes.
If we continue with the voice of reason, the traditional notion of global diplomacy, we will continue to be docile bodies, to be dominated, controlled, brutalized, hegemonized by the global forces. It cannot work, particularly for as long as Donald Trump is still the president of the United States, at least for the next 4 years.
I mean, how different can the script be?
I think if there's a hegemony, and I think that we have to build a counter-hegemony. Because hegemony is a concept that has been popularized by the leftist scholar from southern Italy called Antonio Gramsci. And he spoke about hegemony and counter-hegemony. And I think the counter-hegemony is in the global south. The counter-hegemony is in the African Union. The counter-hegemony is in our regional amalgamation. The counter-hegemony is in providing markets and democracy to our people. Counter-hegemony is being on the table on climate change and rejecting a deal of a few $100 billion while they want to put $1 trillion to rebuild Ukraine. Counter-hegemony is about standing up to statelessness in Africa. And in this vein, I want to say how sad the people of this continent are with what is happening in the Sudan, which is just a great crime scene. You know, people don't remember that Sudan was the first independent black republic. It was not Ghana. It's the Sudan. Sudan has been the place where all the militant African nationalists used to be housed. Nelson Mandela had a passport that was Sudanese, and it was written Nelson Mandela. It was not written Abdul Jabbar Karim. I mean, one of the things that Africans have to do is stand in solidarity. If Sudan stood in solidarity with the Africans during their time of grief, it's important for us to stand up for them. The Somali Republic, which had troops in Mozambique, in Angola, in Zimbabwe, which fought against apartheid South Africa, paid a price with their own-blooded beauty, is being left to be languished along here in the Horn of Africa without help in a fundamental way so that it can come back as a proper member of the East African community. It is really shameful that the cynical political class in this region have decided that everybody is for himself and nobody is for anybody else, and everybody is running to the very bottom of the barrel to scrap the leftovers that are over there. People go to these international communities and give these grand speeches. But the practical counter-hegemony that needs to be built to confront these things is not being built. No appeal to power is going to make any concession. You must make a demand to power for things to change, my dear friend.
And for example, how can the Gordon, the concept of African leaders trooping to summits that are either convened in Europe or in America be changed here? If you look at what transpired in the past few years, you had the US-Africa summit in December 2022 when President Ruto came to power that year, which he attended in Washington, D.C. You also had Italy convene one. You also had the Russians convene one in St. Petersburg when President Putin did the same. Also one convened by Japan, the other convened by China. Can that script flip?
That script can only flip if Africa become intentional about flipping the script. But as far as we still have the ball in our hands and we go to beg, the script may not flip. But then how can the script begin to flip? The script can only flip if within us we have easy resource rotations. You know, Africa, we do not have a common currency. We still have to depend on other currencies, and that's why the financial system is automatically rigged. We do not have, if you live here today, Ayub, without a dollar, you go to Uganda, you get a different currency, Rwanda. Within East Africa, how many currencies do we have? As many as almost 9 or 8. Is it good for business? It's not, because you have to keep looking for other foreign currencies here and there, keep changing money in order to do that. So one thing that Africa must be very intentional about is to make Africa work for itself. One, make traveling around be very easy. Two, interconnectedness of Africa will make African trade blossom. Three, open up our airspaces. Four, make sure that connectivity, internet connectivity in Africa is top-notch. Five, make sure that our security system within the African security architecture work for Africa. In that order, we will have no reason absolutely to be trooped into a room where you walk, shake hands with one president, over 40 of you. It doesn't make a lot of sense. It portrays us the bad way. If at all they have something to share with Africa, it only makes sense that Africa then organizes for summits. That is Africa-US summit. US brings the delegation to Africa.
Okay.
Africa-Russia summit. Russia brings delegation to Africa. It will make more sense to Africa than what we are seeing today.
Yeah, and Prof, you mentioned the need for a change of the stance at the moment, calling for more radicalization of Africa's diplomacy. But how can that work? Because if you look at the flip side also, to just but give this example, also in the world where America was seen as largely as the global policeman with moral authority, the Obama years is when we saw Libya collapse with NATO's no-fly zone imposition, which had denied Gaddafi the much-needed response to the protests. And later on, the regret Obama had expressed with the collapse of Libya. Also, Nicolas Sarkozy, as mentioned by Ahmed there, and also the British Prime Minister then, David Cameron. If that did not work, and this isn't working, then what position can Africa take in this very fluid and tense environment?
One thing that you should make no doubt is that America's decline is so rapid. It's a rapid decline. It is a race to the bottom at a time. In fact, that's what worries them. That is what making Trump to behave the way he's behaving. In fact, the vote in the United States for Donald J. Trump was a vote against self-decline. And this is both in Europe and in the Americas. How, therefore, can Africa flip the page? That is the fundamental question. Of course, we are not yet at a position where financially, economically, we can fight with the US. But we can take advantage of it through our own indigenous voices, common championship of African values, African visions, African desires, African development needs. We can do it at a continental level. One of the institutional normative frameworks of doing so is the African Free Continental Free Trade Area. That could be one of them. But then also, another thing is also at this particular time, where America is becoming more and more, is retreating more and more inwardly, we can also find our alliances and allegiances elsewhere. And those alliances and allegiances, we can find them in Russia, we can find them in China, through other global forces. The BRICS, for instance, are coming. They are coming so forcefully, including with their own currency. You can be sure that America will not be where they are today in the next 50 years. All the projections are out there. In fact, the narrative, the discourse, the progressivist discourse of make America great again is actually an implicit and an explicit acknowledgement of self-decline of former colonial empires. And of course, that explains also what happened in the United Kingdom, the Brexit. Why are people retreating in themselves? Because there are other giants. If at one point you are the land or the empire where the sun never set, in this day and age, you are the empire where the sun never rises. It is a great concern to Western hegemony.
Okay.
You know, the multipolar world, and it's not only in China, it's not only the other force. There is China that is arising, there is also Africa that is rising. We can be self-dependent, we can be self-sufficient. If, for instance, we give strength to our own trade regime, that is actually part of the knowledge that we need to spread around so that we can be self-reliant, self-sufficient.
Yes, Ahmed, your hand is up. I'll come to you, Gordon.
Well, I just want to say, I think that we wish the African Union not to be a place where that they're going to come next year and meet as another African Union. We need to see some progress. We need to see, for example, that the regional community of East Africa brings down the barriers of the borders. We have a free currency. We have no need for several East African ministers. We should just have one. We should have one budget day. We should calibrate our economies. We should be able to export chicken from Tanga to Turkana. I mean, this is just nonsense. And these are the things that, the barriers that are being put up to stop development. And we need to change that. And if we don't change that, then what is going to happen is that this degradation of our economy, the degradation of the society, the unemployment, all these infrastructure problems will continue. And I think that needs new, bright, economic policies that will help produce what is the best social policy in any country or region, and that's jobs, jobs, jobs for people.
Yes, Gordon.
There's one aspect that we seem to be either ignoring or forgetting. That's the role of civil society in all this thing. Because the civil society today in Africa is so fundamental that they manage even to bring down OECD, and they are in the race to replace it with the UN tax model. That in itself shows the achievement of the African civil society. So I think even the leadership that is yet to come must ensure that it incorporates civil society to the fullest, to ensure that the civil society does not just push what is in the interest of the people, but also pushes what is in the interest of the continent at large without segmenting it into various portions. If we go to the UN Security Council, for example, our problems do not start and end with the UN Security Council, but it starts and ends with the UN and its structure. UN, in the manner with which it is structured today, disadvantages Africa in all forms. So if we are to do anything at the UN level, then Africa must champion fully for the reform of UN. And that cannot just come from heads of states alone. That must have a concerted effort from the heads of state and the civil society that will ensure the reforms that we yearn to see are achieved.
Yeah, and can that happen? Professor, finish up here. We have some 4 minutes before.
You know, for the there's a scholar in development economics, actually post-development economics, that says to change the world, we have to have a pluriverse, you know, a pluriverse of ideas. Once we have multiple ideas with which we can experiment, we will live in a better country, in a better continent. But once we surrender our visions, our thought processes, our knowledges to one moral force, to one unipolar force, we lose it. Let Africa come up with their own endogenous ideas. Before, visionary Africans have come up with great ideas. People like Tom Mboya, Leopold Senghor, and the rest. For example, in this continent today, we have a new right called the right to development. That right to development was an indigenous African idea, you know, in the minds of Keba Mbaye. It is that right that has been used, by the way, since 1981 to challenge the global international economic system. Okay, it is the one narrative, the one discourse that has been used to challenge the hegemony, you know, the structural disadvantages that really harm and hurt the people of the global south. We can come up with multiple ideas, and the person who takes over African leadership can create another ism. It can be African nationalism, it can be Ubuntuism, it can be anything else that is African-born, African. And by the way, there is a power in ideas. The world in which we live today is controlled by knowledge practice. You know, it doesn't have to be action all the time. It's knowledge practice. All the neoliberalisms, the isms, communism, human rights ideas, all these are just ideas that are practiced.
Okay.
If an African leader can come up with one discourse in form of an idea, we can revolutionize Africa, we can change the world, with the world will actually follow our visions.
Yes, Ahmed, final comment.
The great Bessie Head, the novelist from Botswana, said that Africans wear their poverty with dignity because they know that this poverty is not theirs, it's man-made. I think it's time we threw out the wearing of this kind of poverty and replace it with a sovereign Africa that is in charge of its continent, that we can march into the stage of history and we can do what our forefathers have fought for and not rest, because right now what we are doing is just politicking and not having a cause. The cause of Africa is still alive.
Okay, yes, Gordon.
Finally, from my end, I want to sincerely wish Kenyan candidate Raila Odinga the very best in this race. I know it is not done till it is done, but even in all that, we know he bears the vision, the aspiration, and the Pan-Africanism that Africa deserves now. We are standing at a very critical juncture that we need not just someone to lead, but we need a leader who has been tried, tested, and has been proven, not just as a leader of a nation, not just as a leader of Africa, but a leader who can champion the aspirations of Africa to the next level.
Much appreciated, gentlemen. A 9-hour marathon show now. I hand over the baton to my colleagues who will be in shortly. Just a summary of the events we had since morning here on the broadcast from Addis. The trio of Seth Olale, Olive Barros, and Stephen Leto gave us an account of the event-filled day at the headquarters of the African Union, and the last and the final address from Musa Faki Mahamat, the outgoing chairperson of the African Union, outlining the continent's position on Palestine and the people of Gaza, talking about finances for critical sectors and Africa's youth, which he had labeled as a gold mine for the continent to leverage on. Also, the maiden speech debut by Joao Lourenço, the Republic of Angola's president, who talked about silencing the guns, and here given the example of the Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo, peace and stability and finance, as he took over from Mohammed Al-Oud Sheikh Al-Ghazouani, the president of the Islamic Republic of Mauritania. Maya Motley, the chairperson of the Caribbean Community countries, also gave a speech, a moving one, gripping to that effect, confronting the challenges of the new world, ending the middlemen and the concept of new colonialism. Stability of the world depends on the stability of the Africa, she said, talking about the apartheid and its end in South Africa. Visa policies she also talked about. Antonio Guterres also said there is need for African positions, permanently so, at the United Nations Security Council, when he expressed his own concerns regarding how the world had failed to settle globally, demanding attention activities, including the wars in Europe and the situation in Gaza. For now, though, my colleagues are here to hand over the baton. Lulu Hassan and Rashid Abdallah are here with us. They will be taking over this live broadcast from now till the conclusion, where we'll be having a winner of the African Union Commission chairperson. Rashid, karibu. I'm being challenged to speak Swahili. Yes, I can.
Clearly you can.
Tunawaambia wananchi wakaribisha wananchi katika sehemu ya
Kiswahili. If you do your English.
Welcome salam.
Naam. Lakini bado ni timu anglophone, kwa usiwe na wasiwasi. Shukrani sana.
Kiongozi.
Good to see you. Much appreciated.
Wow.
Okay, thank you. This is handing over to you, ladies and gentlemen. A long day. We'll be looking at the outcome. Wakenya wanatarajia mengi kutoka Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Tuna wenzetu Seth Olale, Olive Barros na Stephen Leto ambao watatupatia taarifa kamili kutoka Ethiopia, kule ambapo marais wamejumuika katika hafla iliyowaleta pamoja viongozi kutoka bara la Afrika kuweza kuzingatia mambo muhimu yakiwemo mambo ya